The eyes would open for a moment, and the legs moved once, and he kissed the cross greedily, hurriedly, just as though he were anxious to catch hold of something in case of its being useful to him afterwards, though he could hardly have had any connected religious thoughts at the time. And so up to the very block. How strange that criminals seldom swoon at such a moment! On the contrary, the brain is especially active, and works incessantly, probably hard, like an engine at full pressure. I imagine that various thoughts must beat loud and fast through his head, all unfinished ones, and strange funny thoughts, very likely. Like this, for instance: that man is looking at me, and he has a wart on his forehead, and the executioner has burst one of his buttons, and the lowest one is all rusty. And meanwhile he notices and remembers everything. There is one point that cannot be forgotten, round which everything else dances and turns about, and because of this point he cannot faint, and this lasts until the very final quarter of a second, when the wretched neck is on the block, and the victim listens and waits, and knows. That's the point. He knows that he is just now about to die, and listens for the rasp of the iron above his head. If I lay there, I should certainly listen for that grating sound, and hear it too. There would probably be but the 10th part of an instant left to hear it in, but one would certainly hear it. And imagine, some people declare that when the head flies off it is conscious of having flown off. Just imagine what a thing to realize! Fancy if consciousness were to last for even 5 seconds. Draw the scaffold so that only the top step of the ladder comes in clearly. The criminal must be just stepping on to it, his face as white as notepaper. The priest is holding the cross to his blue lips, and the criminal kisses it, and knows and sees and understands everything. The cross and the head. There's your picture. The priest and the executioner, with his 2 assistants, and a few heads and eyes below. Those might come in as subordinate accessories, a sort of mist. There's a picture for you. The prince paused and looked around. "Certainly that isn't much like quietism," murmured Alexandra, half to herself. "Now tell us about your love affairs," said Adelaida, after a moment's pause. The prince gazed at her in amazement. "You know," Adelaida continued, "you owe us a description of the Basle picture. But first I wish to hear how you fell in love. Don't deny the fact, for you did, of course. Besides, you stop philosophizing when you are telling about anything. Why are you ashamed of your stories the moment after you have told them?" asked Aglaya suddenly. "How silly you are!" said Mrs. Epanchin, looking indignantly towards the last speaker. "Yes, that wasn't a clever remark," said Alexandra. "Don't listen to her, prince," said Mrs. Epanchin. "She says that sort of thing out of mischief. Don't think anything of their nonsense, it means nothing. They love to chaff, but they like you. I can see it in their faces. I know their faces." "I know their faces too," said the prince, with a peculiar stress on the words. "How so?" asked Adelaida with curiosity. "What do you know about our faces?" exclaimed the other two in chorus. But the prince was silent and serious. All awaited his reply. "I'll tell you afterwards," he said quietly. "Ah, you want to arouse our curiosity," said Aglaya. "And how terribly solemn you are about it." "Very well," interrupted Adelaida. "Then if you can read faces so well, you must have been in love. Come now, I've guessed. Let's have the secret." "I have not been in love," said the prince, as quietly and seriously as before. I have been happy in another way." "How? How?" "Well, I'll tell you," said the prince, apparently in a deep reverie. End of Part 1, Chapter 5. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.